Despite the name, Les Rallizes Dénudés is not a French band, but a Japanese band and one of the most significant names in the scenes of noise and experimental rock. While those terms have been popularized thanks to names such as the Velvet Underground, later with Sonic Youth, and in the 90s with the rise of shoegaze, most notably with acts such as Slowdive and My Bloody Valentine, Les Rallizes Dénudés have achieved up to this point to have a cult following that appreciates the way they have this more raw and unfiltered direction, unlike all of the groups mentioned before. It's this ridiculous screeching guitar feedback, the over-the-top noise from all of the recordings. It gets to a point where it becomes too much, but it's because all of those recordings are so insane, it is going to immediately create an impression on you, which might be a negative one, and this is quite understandable. While it is not to the point of just chaotic avant-garde bunch of noise with no structure, there is rhythm and melody to their tracks, but the noise and feedback from the recordings is not like the one you find in shoegaze, for example, where the dynamics are being used in a way to evoke this more upfront emotional power. Les Rallizes Dénudés recordings feel like taken from an underground venue with poor noise cancellation done with a tape recorder, which is probably not that far from the truth, and this group does not have a single studio album. Every single album that has been released are live recordings, most of the time archivals, and in many cases bootleg or unauthorized releases. And this is the case for one of their most popular live recordings in their catalog, Heavier Than a Death in the Family, an unofficial release that is blocked from sale on Discogs, which first emerged in 2002 with live recordings back in March 12, 1977, with the exception of track 5 that was recorded live somewhere between 1976 to 1980. At least that's what it says in the very first version of Discogs. I've been extremely lucky to have this album in my collection, with a re-release in 2010 by Phoenix Records. This was one of the most expensive CDs I've bought, and there's a possibility of this being one of the priciest possessions in my collection. I can spend a big portion of this video just talking about the very mysterious history of the group, especially with the founding member Takashi Mizutani or the bassist Moraki Wakabayashi, who along with other members of the Red Army faction of the Japan Communist League hijacked a flight in 1970. Yes, this actually happened. But instead, I talk about this particular album, whose even the physical media is like the definition of a bootleg. Usually when it comes to CDs, I'm not really into digipacks. Lots of them might look cool, but they are way more impractical. So in this case, where you have a jewel case, you can't really mess this up. Maybe in the case of like 80s and 90s jewel cases, you might find teeth in the middle that break easily. But considering this is one of the more expensive CDs I've bought, this is the worst jewel case I've ever seen. Like in 2010, they have managed to mess up a jewel case. Thankfully, the teeth in the middle are strong, not easily broken, but trying to pull the CD out or put it back on requires a bit of force, more than normal. It's pretty tight. While the jewel case is pretty standard, those parts feel kinda loose, as they're like about to break any moment. Sealing the jewel case wants a bit more force than usual, and anytime you want to close it, you wanna make sure that the booklet doesn't fall off and get stuck here. And this is for me the most baffling thing about this whole release. The size of the booklet is not even right. It doesn't fit properly, which is why it's wrinkled. It's just slightly bigger than usual. You do not mess this up. I don't think I've ever seen this happen with another jewel case. Even DIY releases are more carefully crafted than this. Also, don't expect any information about the album. The booklet only contains pictures from other albums of the label, and the only information you get is over here, where it says that the label is releasing this only in hopes that this will reach the owners who have the rights to the master recordings, who have been unable to locate them. This is bootleg at its finest, and despite this being a physical release that sucks, this feels like the only appropriate way for this to be released, and I am so happy to have this in my collection, even in this condition. It's an interesting case where these downgrades and problems are the things that actually add value to this album. Almost any time I make one of those essential videos, I'm thinking of what could be that one thing that can make my video feel different from the rest that are available at the moment. Because I wouldn't want to just make another video talking positively about Les Rallizes Dénudés. And then I remember that I have this bootleg CD, and this felt like the perfect thing to add to my video. Apart from this increased value thanks to this physical release, putting the CD on, someone who is not really accustomed to the sound of Les Rallizes Dénudés could easily imply that there is something wrong with the CD. And like I said, even for those who are aware of noise rock and shoegaze, may not be able to get accustomed to this. The sound of this album is so rough that it also adds to the value of this project. It is one of those elements that have greatly contributed to the cult following that has emerged over all of those decades. It's due to this roughness that is able to subvert your expectations, push the boundaries of art, and create a listening experience that is not your average one. What is also really funny about this release is that this is probably one of the easiest to get into because of its length being 75 minutes, and this does sound a lot, but this is actually one of the shortest albums available, as lots of them end up being double CDs and have more than 2 hours of material. And I know that some of the tracks included over here have been rearranged for what is possibly their most popular live recording album, which is Alpha-27, released in 1991, but this is the one album that I was able to get in a somewhat reasonable price, and it's also shorter in length. Starting off with the content of the album, we have the 15-minute track Strung Out Deeper Than the Night, which is this really interesting usage of a simplistic blues rhythm with a ton of psychedelic effects, quite an extended use of delay that can be heard both in the vocals and the drums, and this lo-fi recording makes this whole thing sound weirdly mesmerizing. But the biggest highlight out of this track, which is an element that in my opinion makes for the strongest impression out of this whole album, are the screeching guitars with long and extended solo parts, whose feedback is so over the top that at times can basically cover the whole rest of the instrumentation. They become so upfront and also have this heavy and noisy psychedelic feel, which is beautiful in its own bizarre way. Despite the lo-fi production though, you can basically pick up the presence of all of the instruments and their roles. While the guitars and the vocals are the ones that feel that they have the leading role, the groovy bass on the simplistic blues type melody is thick and never gets overshadowed, and same with the drums that end up having this mechanical feel, and anytime the cymbals play, it's this explosion of noise that blends with the guitar feedback. Absolutely tremendous track that is able to keep your interest with the way this plays out like a fun jam session. The next track, The Night Collectors, is even more unhinged than the previous one in terms of feedback. The guitar gets to the point where not only it overshadows big parts of the instrumentation, but also screeches like so much, it feels like the instrument is in pain. This track is to the more chaotic side of things, not really having that much of a distinct structure that has been followed in order to make it stand out as much in comparison to what the previous track achieved. For me, the most interesting moment out of this whole album is the track Night of the Assassins, which is like an extended cover out of the most popular track from Peggy March's I Will Follow Him from back in 1963. The track becomes distinct from its thick bass lines and is used in a psychedelic fashion with lengthy guitar solo sections where the guitar has some of the most notable screeches and feedback you'll get in this whole album. This feels like the perfect blend of its bizarre transcending beauty alongside these over-the-top noisy lo-fi sections, but all of the instruments serve their purpose in a jam session that is like out of this world. Enter the Mirror comes in a slight contrast with everything the album has done up to this point. The volume seems to not be that high up, and while you can still sense the feedback lurking in pretty much the entirety of this recording, this is the one track that comes the closest to being hypnotic. The groovy side of the bass and the drums keeps this steady flow and pattern, and the vocals become the most standout part, with the crazy layers of effects becoming more apparent than ever. And of course, once again, the guitars are able to really add up to this noisy lo-fi recording. It's possibly the most laid-back moment, but only because you get kinda used to what the album provided beforehand. People Can Choose is the next track and returns to this more chaotic side of things that we got with the second track, The Night Collectors. It's another case of a track that feels pretty interesting in terms of a jam session, but because of its constant messiness and not really having that much of a distinct structure to it, which I consider to be one of the most interesting aspects we get out of this album, it becomes another case of a track where I don't think there's anything more to add about it, other than it's not one of the standouts for me. Finally, it's Ice Fire, the longest track out of the album that goes for 16 minutes, and it's absolutely insane. Having all of the most standout elements that we got in this whole album so far and going overboard with it, this is a punchy, heavy psych sound with the noise and feedback dominating the extremely rough recording. The solo parts feel like they elevate you. It's like an onslaught of pink noise that just keeps going and going. It's relentless, brutal, and unforgiving. Weirdly enough, this album sounds like it's so ahead of its time. While it would make more sense to have such rough, lo-fi recordings in the 70s, this more intentional manipulation of sounds feels more of like a modern technique of artists trying to tweak effects to make the sound as unhinged as possible. These recordings may have never been intended to sound the way they do, so wrong, so imperfect, and yet this imperfection, this roughness around the edges, does not take away from the experience. It has the complete opposite effect. These recordings that found the light of day are rightfully treated as archived treasures that will remain in history as some of the most groundbreaking and mysterious recordings of their time. And that's why Heavier Than Death in the Family by Les Rallizes Dénudés is, in my opinion, an essential. Let me know your thoughts of this album down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.